Trying to manage my windows here. I'm not doing a very good job of it. Juanita, do you remember how to move this toolbar? Am
That's
I?
that's a very good question.
Oh, maybe. I don't remember it being so, oh, maybe it just disappears like that. In any case, those of you who are here are joining us for Create California Native Habitat Gardens with our instructor, Juanita Salisbury, and we are going to get started right now. Thanks for joining us tonight. All of our attendees are muted by default, and we are encouraging questions. However, questions will be held until the end of the presentation. So please do put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will get to all of them. Also, just as a reminder, the webinar is being recorded, so if you would like to rewatch it at any time, the recording will be available on the Bosco website, generally within 2 weeks of the class. And for those of you who don't know, Bosco is the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency. They represent a lot of counties around the Bay Area and San Francisco Bay, providing water to over 1.8 million people and over 40,000 businesses and community organizations in Alameda, Santa Clara, and San Mateo counties. So the objective of our lecture series is that we in the community realize how we can help Bosca make sure that our future water supply needs are met. And residential water use, over half, it goes to outdoor for irrigation and landscaping. So by attending classes tonight, you're going to get some great techniques for use of water efficient planting and gardening overall that will help save water. For those of you in the Bosca service area, you have the Lawn Be Gone lawn replacement program. If you haven't already taken advantage of that, take a look at what that rebate offers. You can get some really nice compensation for switching out your thirsty grass for a beautiful water-wise garden. And likewise, if you don't yet have a rain barrel, that's a great investment, and you can receive up to $200 in rebates for rain barrels. They also have a smart controller rebate installation program and rain garden rebate. Rain gardens are actually easier to install than people might think. And those gardens meeting the minimum requirements can get up to $300 per garden. For those of you in the city of Santa Clara, you may not be aware that our residential lawn conversion rebate program can earn your property up to $5,000. So if you haven't already looked into it, check out santaclaraca.gov/garden guide. One of the toughest things about the lawn conversion process is picking plants, and we've got a nice photo glossary with the coverage values all populated. So you don't have to go through a text-heavy plant list. You can take a look at some pretty pictures instead. So if you're thinking about a lawn conversion, please do check that out. Excuse me. For those of you in the Valley Water Service area, Depending what city you're in, different cities have different cost sharing available. So do check out their website to see how much your city is offering to cost share. The base rate for Valley Water is $2 per square foot of lawn converted to waterwise garden. So that's a great starting point. And if your city offers cost sharing, then that's even better. For other information, you can check out South Bay Green Gardens. They have a lot of wonderful resources available for landscape design, for tips on how to water, how to do your own water-wise survey. So do check that out as a resource. And again, here is their contact information. I personally found the best way to reach out to Valley Water is through their email address at conservation@valleywater.org. You generally get a response within a day. Bosque is also offering a number of classes in the same webinar series coming up, and they extend well past April 15th. So do go to their website, and they have classes offered through June this year, and a lot of great topics. So if you're an avid gardener concerned about saving water, look out for Bosca's classes coming up. And this last resource is another handy one if you are planning a garden restoration or just curious about plants. BayAreaGardening.org has a lot of gardens that have already been designed, and you can kind of hover over pictures on their website, find out the names and details about plants that you're interested in. So if you're not too familiar with plants, or even if you're a plant expert, you might find some that you didn't know. But it's a really helpful resource for those of you looking for some extra gardening help. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it back to Juanita, our instructor for tonight's class.
Thanks, Victoria. Wait, I will bring this up. Slideshow. I see what you mean about, okay, from the beginning. All right, well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. Really, I'm super excited to talk about creating California native habitat gardens. I'm a California registered landscape architect, and I also have a degree in psychobiology. And so lots of science goes into everything that I will be talking about this evening. Here in Palo Alto, I've started the Primrose Way Pollinator Gardens, and back in 2016. So we've been doing those for 9 years now. And you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, YouTube, Primrose Way, or if you don't like social media, I have a website, primrosewaypollinatorgarden.com, where you can go read a little bit more about us, look at a handy map of our locations, which looks like this. If you need to see what these plants look like, out in a gardens situation, we have a lot to look at here in Palo Alto. So if you're coming in through Embarcadero Road, Highway 101 is off to the right here. The first garden you'll run into is the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden. Further down, the Gwynda Street Pollinator Garden. And then up Newell Road off of Hamilton is the Island Drive Garden. There's a cul-de-sac garden, the Arcadia Place Garden, the Hopkins Avenue Pollinator Garden, the West Greenwich Pollinator Garden, and then the Churchill Street Pollinator Garden. So we have lots of different places that you can go and look and see what these plants look like. Also, I'd like to point out one of those next Bosca talks on the 12th of April will be held here in Palo Alto at the Summer Winds Nursery on San Antonio Road. I'll be giving a talk there, followed by the purchase of plants, so that the nursery there has a huge native plant section, and I'll be there to help people select things, answer questions. And I do know that there are going to be a lot of great plants there for people to get. So it's a real great opportunity to try to get some things into the ground right now while the ground is still cool and moist. And that's a great place to find some plants. So mark a calendar. for that one, and the information about that is also on the Bosca website. So, quick overview, three things: planning, planting, and maintaining. So, always have a plan, and then we'll talk about planting plants and stuff, and then what does it mean to have a habitat garden? Habitat gardens will be full of life, and a lot of it will be insect life, some of it will be bird life, some of it will be lizards, and you just never know what else might show up. But that's what happens when you plant a habitat garden. So we have to talk about how to maintain that so that the organisms that you have invited into your garden can complete their life cycles. First off, ask yourself, what are your habitat goals? And what I mean by that is, what do you see yourself accomplishing in your yard? Do you want to help butterflies like this beautiful pipevine swallowtail or this beautiful yellow-faced bumblebee? And these are photos I've taken myself. I do a lot of monitoring of our gardens, so I know what organisms prefer what things. And I know that because of the stability of our gardens over time in terms of the organisms that I see, that they are working. So ask yourself, what do you want to see? Do you want to help butterflies? Do you want to help bees? Do you want more birds? All of these things are connected. If you plant native plants, and I'm going to talk specifically about those, you will help birds. And what's distressing about this is that if you were alive in 1970, which I was, more than 1 in 4 or 2.9 billion birds in the US and Canada have disappeared within your lifetime. Habitat loss is likely to be one of the driving factors in these declines. So if you make a habitat garden in your yard, you can absolutely help these creatures. And this is a Nuttall's woodpecker that was in my front yard, and then a beautiful dark-eyed junco in a friend's yard. So the birds will absolutely come if you plant native. And here in California, we are a biodiversity hotspot. What does that mean? It means that we have more abundant species here than just about and anywhere else on the planet. In fact, we are one of about 34 places on the entire planet that is as biodiverse as California. There's so much to choose from in terms of plants, almost 8,000 species, some found nowhere else on the planet, more than any other state in the United States. And the native plants give you abundant ecological benefits. You can support wildlife as well as pollinators and other insects. And the best thing about it is that many of these species are drought tolerant. No rain during the summer, not a problem. Rain only for a couple of months, not a problem. So plants for every situation, plants for completely dry during the summertime, those exist. So you can choose species that if you plant them once, get them established after about a year, you'll never have to water them again. And planting native also helps insect species, which we'll talk about why that is. And insects are super important in the environment, and they're declining worldwide. And that's not good. We need insects to keep plant life going and to keep birds fed and energy in the food chain, all of that. So planting native can support those functions. So what to plant? So we're going to talk about planting. My go-to resource to find plants and to research what to plant is the Calscape database. And this is the old landing page of theirs. They've updated it since then. But I just took a screenshot of their landing page back in the day. It's basically a database of all the plants in California, all the native plants. And it's done by the California Native Plant Society, dedicated group of people who preserve biodiversity in our state. And they break it down for you in terms of like whether you have, and you're looking for all the plants, trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, grasses, succulents, vines, ferns, whether things grow in the shade or the sun, part shade, ground covers, lots to choose from. And so the great thing about this website is they also give you links to nurseries that have the plants. So not every garden center will have them. Um, Sometimes they have the offerings of non-native things, which, if you like some non-native things, you can have a few, as long as you have about 70% of the plants in your residence are native plants. Overall, you can maintain um, a family of birds. That's basically the lower limit of what they need to survive. So if you want to get rid of your lawn, which I highly recommend, an easy way to do it, and this is in planting, if you want to just cover that lawn up and stick some nice native plants in there, don't spray chemicals on the soil. So you don't want to like expose ourselves to grass killing chemicals or laboring to remove the sod because that will remove a lot of beneficial organisms. The soil nutrients will be depleted. Instead, the easy way to do it is to smother the grass with cardboard. A few layers of that, topped with some compost and then mulch on the top. And then you can move all that aside, poke a hole in the cardboard and plant right in there. And it looks like an instant garden. And there's more information on the whole process from stopwaste.org. So it doesn't have to be a ton of work. It can be as simple as using up those boxes from Amazon and getting some mulch if your city provides that, and then some native plants, and you're good to go. What I like to do when people are saying, "Oh, I don't know how many plants to get or what's going to fit." So what you want to do in terms of how to lay out a garden, measure your space to see how big it is. And here's an example of a square that's 12 feet on a side. And before you put any plants in, you want to create some structure. What I mean by structure is show some pathways, draw some pathways through there so that you can get in there and weed things and plant things. And structure gives you some nice edges to look at. And it just gives you a form that you can work in. So once you have that figured out, your pathway, then, um, you know, after you've selected plants, and we'll talk about how to do that, draw them as circles at their mature diameter. If you're using graph paper, that comes in really handy. You can have one square equaling a single inch, and you'll have it to scale. If you say, like, if this is the square is like a quarter inch, it'll be a quarter inch equals a foot. So that will be your scale. So you can see I've overlapped some of these circles. So the yellow ones have a little overlap. That's how you space things out. You don't want things to be completely on top of each other to start with. You can, when you're initially planting, the spacing is to have the circles just touching or overlapping. This green circle is something taller, and there are some plants underneath. So there's a lot of different things to think about. You're not just looking at a flat surface. Remember, things grow up and there's room underneath of those plants for other things. But basically what you get then, you get groupings of plants. And so a nice mass of plants is really good because that creates a lot of goodies for the insects to eat. And insects are hungry things. So you want to give a lot of abundance for them to have. If you're interested in helping bees, a massing of plants about 3 feet in diameter is sufficient for a plant that's 3 feet in diameter to at their mature stage and larger. So that's kind of like, um, trying to figure out spacing and quantities so that you have then a list with numbers like I need 7 of those, a dozen of these, 3 of those, 1 of those. So that way you can plan your budget accordingly. Now, to choose those plants to get the most bang for the buck, in a habitat garden. You want to plant the plants with power, and those plants are keystone species. What are keystone species? So keystone species, they play a pivotal role in an ecosystem. Without it, the entire system would be dramatically different or might even cease to exist. These species have low functional redundancy, which means that no other species can fully replace what they do. And so the takeaway from that is if you plant multiple keystone species, then you get high functional redundancies, meaning you have backup. If something fails, you have a bunch of other things to support the ecosystem stability. I cannot stress the importance enough of keystone species. They're critically important. They connect everything. And that's one of the superpowers of planting a habitat garden. You will almost 100% guaranteed have success if you plant keystone species first. So why do you prioritize planting keystone species? Some of these benefits: an amplified impact. Keystone plant species have a disproportionate impact on the overall health and diversity of an ecosystem compared to their abundance. Sometimes you just need one of a species, like a big oak tree, and it has a huge impact on the environment compared to their abundance. So instead of like having 20 oak trees to make a huge difference, sometimes you only need one. And by planting those first, you jumpstart the development of your thriving habitat. Another benefit is an adaptation. Many keystone plants are particularly well adapted to the local environment. Planting them first allows them to establish themselves quickly, creating that foundation and fostering those conditions suitable for other native species to thrive. They provide connection. They act as connectors in the environment, creating a ripple effect of connections throughout the environment. They also provide a framework. They create living physical structures and niches that benefit a variety of other plant and animal species. And the big one here, time saving. By planting those high impact species first, you maximize that ecological benefit sooner, basically instantly. You leverage their power to create a network of ready-made connections. It's amazing. And it's super economical because you can achieve those maximal ecological benefits with limited resources and minimal efforts. If you can't afford a whole oak tree, plant an acorn. Same thing happens, you get a big tree. And scalability. The concept of keystone species can be applied to gardens of all sizes, even in a single planting pot. If you plant a keystone species in there, the benefits to other organisms will still be there. So all the way from small pots to giant estates to the whole state of California, you can recreate that macrocosm in the microcosm. So you get your own little biodiversity hotspot that reflects the overall biodiversity hotspot that is California. So how do you know if a plant is a keystone species? So it all has to do with the mealtime. So consider function. Plants are the primary producers of food and the basis of food webs. So energy from the sun, get ready, here it comes, goes into the plant leaves. Those plant leaves are eaten by insects, and then that energy, which was a insect, is now being fed to baby birds. So 37% of animal species are plant-eating insects, and as a rule, native insects only eat the native plants they evolved with. So if you have a garden full of non-native plants, it doesn't have the same function as native plants in channeling that energy into the food web so that you can support the organisms that rely on it. And so plants that efficiently channel the sun's energy into the food web in ways that other plants cannot are likely to be keystone species. If they feed a lot of different insects, if you have a plant species like an oak tree that hundreds of insects feed on, that is going to be a keystone species. Oaks are keystone species because they feed so many things and provide so many benefits. So something that has a lot of uh, hungry insects that eat it is more likely to be a keystone species. So, don't be afraid of plants with holes in them. Plants aren't decorations, even though they're pretty. They have pink flowers, they smell nice. Plants are food for the insects out there. You're going to have those hungry, hungry insects eating. Um, and so whenever I go to the garden center, I look for plants that have holes in them because I know that they are yummy. And sometimes when you bring home a plant from the nursery with holes, you get butterfly larvae. So it's a twofer. You get butterflies and plants. And so what does that mean? Well, you have these tasty larvae. And so that means that native plants will attract many native pollinators and other insects, birds, and other organisms. So among those other things, and keystone plants provide food for more species than do other plants. And the great thing about the Calscape website is that they tell you how many species a specific plant feeds. So like oaks are the big ones, um, willows, cherries, maples, and so forth. So a lot of different species um, are keystone species, which is great because you have a lot to choose from. As I was saying, Calscape helps sort out what plants feed multiple species. And if you have a choice between something that feeds a couple hundred species versus something that feeds 10, choose the one that feeds more because that's how you get the bang for your buck in a habitat. And so I took a screenshot here where you can order by the number of butterflies hosted. Um, Butterflies are larvae when they are hatch out of the egg and they do their thing and turn into butterflies. Um, and so you're going to look for plants that they feed the butterfly larvae because that's what butterfly larvae eat. Also, moth larvae will eat them as well. Um, and you can see what butterflies and moths eat particular plants. And for every butterfly species, there are 19 species of moths. So literally almost 20 times more moth species than butterflies. So a lot of larvae that you can feed. So you can like sort the data here and see they've got the willow popped out on top, and then the oaks, and then the cherries and so forth. If you want to go to a keystone native plant species for, that are not just trees, but if you wanted to look at trees and shrubs, and then the herbaceous plants. This is actually another screenshot done by the National Wildlife Federation, where they've looked at the Mediterranean California Ecoregion 11. You can go to their website and read about the types of keystone plants, the ones that feed the caterpillars, and then the plants that feed the specialist bees. There are some bee species in California. We have about 1,600 species of native bees. We're not counting honeybees, those aren't native. So about 1,600 species, more than any other state in the United States. And some of them are really picky about the pollen that they use to rear their offspring with. Bees are vegetarians. They feed their babies a little loaf of pollen and nectar, and that's how you get the next generation of native bees. And so some are very picky about what they eat. And so they break that down for those host plants for pollen specialist bees. They give you, I mean, they make it super easy. The top 30 keystone plant species or genera, the genus, the genera, well, that's plural for genus, for butterfly and moth caterpillars. Make it super easy to choose from. Okay, the oaks. Almost nothing compares to oaks in terms of the ecosystem services that oaks provide. And I always tell people, if you have a space to plant an oak tree, plant that first. So a valley oak, which is deciduous, means it loses its leaves every year. Um, Used to be 61% of the tree cover here in the Santa Clara Valley. Now I think it's about 1%. And I would love to see everybody go out and plant a valley oak because they're just what they do is beyond incredible. They provide critical support to the entire ecosystem, and they have an interesting root structure, a taproot that goes down to the water table that pumps water up and then delivers it out along the lateral surface roots, which other plants then use. So it waters all of the other plants. So literally a built-in biological irrigation system with a valley oak. Amazing creature that these plants are. And then underneath those oaks, you plant your native species like Monardella, which helps with the health of the tree. But these trees are insect factories, transforming that sunlight into protein to feed countless birds and other species. They grow quickly. People say, well, don't oaks take forever? And the answer to that is no, they actually grow really fast, like several feet a year. And they send those tap roots down really fast. So don't feel like you have to plant a big one to start with because you have to dig a big hole and everything. And I'm all about minimizing the work. So if you can get one that's like in a small 1 gallon pot, it's going to establish really fast. And it's going to send that taproot down, and um, you're golden after that. They can live up to 600 years, and oak trees add value to real estate. So houses that have these beautiful, big, stately oak trees, a safe distance from the residents, of course, add a lot of value to the real estate. And you know, uh, that's a wonderful benefit for the homeowner. So some of the other shrubs, I'm just going to give you guys some examples of the keystone species that I like to use in our gardens that have been super easy to use. Some of the shrubs that I like to use are the Ceanothus species. This is Ceanothus maritima valley violet. It's evergreen, which means it's green all year long. It has these nice, beautiful dark green glossy leaves, so it doesn't look all dry. Um, Beautiful blue blossoms starting in January, super low water use, and the larval host for dozens of butterfly and moth species. And this is a black-tailed bumblebee, and they come out in the wintertime. So they need something to eat in the winter, something to drink, something to feed their babies. And the Ceanothus species do that. Beautiful plant. Another favorite that I love, and I use this one over and over again because it's just super reliable, is Arctostaphylos densiflora Howard McMinn. People call these manzanitas, common name. Again, evergreen leaves with these little white tubular blooms that come out in January. And Arctostaphylos species support 78 caterpillar species and 13 pollen specialist bees. They also provide berries, nectar, and shelter to many other organisms. And here we can see another yellow-faced bumblebee having nectar. And these are such great shrubs. I have used them in our corridor project, which if you uh, come to Palo Alto and take a look, there's a section of the corridor between Lewis Road and is it Mark Twain, which we planted up a couple of years ago, and we've only watered it one time, and the plants are all alive. And this is one of them. So once it's in there during the rainy season, you basically don't have to water it. So huge water savings, save you money. Ah, and I refer to myself as a ribes head. So, oops, getting ahead of myself, a ribes head, because I'm a sucker for pink flowers. This is Ribes malvaceum, Christie Ridge, and this is in December, you know, the middle of winter, and at the Hopkins Avenue Garden. Look at these beautiful panicles of blooms. We have so many different species of ribes, and these things are just gorgeous. Hummingbirds love them, bumblebees love them. Super low water use, blooms for weeks and weeks and weeks. Gets about 5 to 8 feet tall, 5 feet wide, and it's a host plant to 3 confirmed and 76 likely species of butterflies and moths. I mean, look at that. It's just, I mean, how would you not want to have at least a few ribes in your home garden? Beautiful plants. Another ceanothus. This is an alternative for your lawn. You can't really walk on it per se, but if you like that nice green sort of consistent look that's like just a solid mass, you can get a ceanothus species, Ceanothus horizontalis, Yankee Point. Evergreen, again, doesn't lose its leaves all at once. Um, Super glossy, about 15 inches tall, spreads, blue blossoms, can grow in sun or shade, and doesn't really like to be watered during the summertime. You can kill it with too much water. So again, just a super wonderful plant. And fun fact about ceanothus, these blue blooms, if you take the bloom and uh, lather it up with some water, because of the saponin in the blossom, you can actually wash your hands with it. It's very soapy. So, it's the gardener's soap. Um, but so that's a few shrubs. Now, I always tell people start with trees first. And so we ourselves have our at my house, we have a very small yard, but I cram in as many plants as possible. And one of the reasons I started these pollinator gardens is because I wanted more space to garden. And now I have like 7 public gardens, so that worked out well. But if you want to plant things in your own home yard, but you just don't know what you can fit in, you have a lot of different options. And so Acer macrophyllum, the big leaf maple, beautiful uh, deciduous plant that is easy to grow. You can grow, and this is super easy, Cercocarpus betuloides, the mountain mahogany, and it's very upright and narrow. So you can get that into almost any space because it literally like grows straight up. Um, I actually do have a willow in my front yard, and people say, well, aren't willows like they use a lot of water? I hand water it when I remember. And I think it's already sent its tap roots down into the water table. So I have not watered it at all this year so far, and it's doing great. I have Sambucus nigra, the elderberry, which is part shade. It drops its leaves. It's deciduous. One of my go-tos for evergreen trees is the Prunus illisifoli. This is also a keystone species, the holly leaf cherry. Um, Super easy to grow. I don't water these at all. And so, another water savings. Acer negundo, the box elder, another variety of maple. We have our street tree, the Modesto ash. And then because I like to plant food for the humans, I've planted several hazelnuts into the yard because they need male and females um, to fertilize each other. Another cherry, Prunus virginiana. This one's deciduous, Arctostaphylos. Some of them grow up into tree forms. Um, the red buds, and then, of course, the toyon. So there are more, but these are all really great tree species that I recommend. If you don't want to plant an oak because your yard is too small, you can always plant a scrub oak because they come in a smaller size as well. So lots of choices. Get those trees in there first, and then work on your shrub layer. But yeah, lots of choices. Um, so again, shrubs that I recommend, and that's the Prunus illisifoliate in full bloom, the holly leaf cherry. Look at those. Look at those blooms. This is covered with butterflies and bees um, when it's blooming. And people say, well, I'm afraid of getting stung. Well, I've been doing these pollinator gardens for like the last, 9 years, and I have never been stung. And I get right up in those bee faces, and they're not really not interested. The only aggressive things out there are the honeybees. They're aggressive, so I give them a wide berth. And then the meat eaters, the wasps, are not interested in the blooms necessarily, although they do like the nectar. I give wasps a wide berth because they can really mess up your day, but I have never been stung. Anyway, so shrubs, the Arctostaphylos species, Ceanothus, um, Eriogonums, which are called buckwheats, lots to choose from there. And then the Baccharis, the coyote brush. Baccharis is one of those species that come in a lot of different forms. You can get a really flat one. We have these in our gardens. There's a flat one called um, Twin Peaks that stays very, very low and tight. It's like a foot tall. And then the pigeon point, which is a little bit more mounding. And then you have an upright, almost tree form. Trees, again, your oak trees, your maple trees, and your cherry trees. And because of these amplified effects of keystone plants, you can simply plant one to get the benefits and build from there. So you don't need a ton of these plants. You literally need just one. Although um, I want all the plants, so I never stop with one. Okay, so the power of connections. When you get these keystone plants in there, the plants in the habitat create this framework of relationships for other organisms. And a habitat is all about those relationships. It's not just between the plants and the insects. It's like it's you as well, because you are the habitat manager, so you are part of these relationships. So you're one of these nodes in that great scheme of nodeness. And so we know that there are connections, that the plants do things that are very mysterious. They have their own agenda. So if you plant native plants, they kind of tell other native plants to come and spread their seeds here because it's good. Um, they seem to encourage other native plants to colonize. So here at the Primrose Way Garden, we have Epilobium ciliatum growing there. I did not plant that. That is a native that just seeded itself in there. I have Baccharis that seeds itself in there. And I managed to catch the culprit helping spread the seeds. And that's the function of bees, basically, is to spread the seeds of all these other plants for the other insects to eat. And you can see that her mouth parts almost exactly are the same shape as the flower. So the relationships are so intertwined, even the shapes are the same. So it's amazing. So, and we know that this connectivity promotes the spread of plants into adjacent areas. And so more native plants are found in patches that are connected, like corridors, which is why we're doing the corridor project, than isolated patches. So the more that you connect things together, the more you end up with the spread. It's pretty cool how that works. So when you plant a native garden, you set nature in motion, literally. It's like a machine, but a living machine, a superorganism that emerges. And so these gardens are super dynamic. They're always changing. The garden that you start out planting is not the garden you end up with because the plants move around how they want to be. Um, you say, how do they do that? They some spread by runners. Some will like let their limbs drop over and then tip root and then they move around. Um, and so you end up with relationships between the plants themselves, organisms that use the plants, their caretakers, and the overall structure. All of this changes over time. So it's not going to be static. A habitat garden is something that's you set into motion. And that is a beautiful swallowtail butterfly that lays its eggs on Perideridia, otherwise known as Yampa, which roots are edible. And that's nectaring there on Monardella. So we provide nectar for the adults, but really it's the larvae that we want to feed. Most adults don't live very long. Insects spend a lot of time as larvae, and so we want to promote the um, the maintenance of the larva as well. So once you um, get your keystone, those backbone shrubs in there, keep adding plants. don't just stop. And you may not be able to help yourself. Because if you imagine building a house, those keystone plant species are like those load-bearing walls. They're essential for the structure and the stability of the entire building. And once those walls are in place, you can add other components like the floors, the doors, the windows, representing various plant and animal species that the habitat supports. You can add beautiful things like brodeas. These are a nice bulb that we have here in California. Lots of things that grow from bulbs. So, you know, think of it like the outdoor living. You can continue to add those accoutrements to your residence. Um, and the biological superpower of these connections is that you're cycling water through biology. Um, Plants and animals are storing water in their living tissues, which is where it's supposed to be, and move it through the environment using various processes. So water is literally promoting life, and you are promoting life by encouraging water to be inside of these organisms. And so if you think about the water cycle, we have the huge, like overall thing, but you also have plant uptake, plants and animals, and evapotranspiration. These are biological processes that um, that happen when you have plants. So water goes into living tissues. And even though this is a small part of the overall quantity of water on the planet, it's the part that's actually in living tissue. So it's literally maintaining and sustaining life. And so the native plants, because these organisms, the neoterpes that eat poppies, or the monarch caterpillars that eat milkweed, or I believe that's an Ackman, no, that's a gray hair streak eating Encelia. Um, the native plant superpower, because those native insects are eating these plants, they're transferring their moisture into other organisms. They're little bags of water, essentially, water and protein, which is the the most beautiful bird food ever. Super tasty and easy for baby birds to swallow. That's a moth larva. There, you can always tell. Little inchworms. And imagine those hungry baby birds eating those larvae. Mm-mm. So what are the implications? Because if you're doing a habitat garden, you become the habitat manager. And because those native plants will attract a variety of native pollinators and other insects, you want to use best practices to help them complete their life cycles. You want them to mate. You want them to lay eggs. You want those eggs to develop and grow. So you have to think about what can you do to help that happen. So, because your habitat will attract birds, I always tell people, you know, effective and attractive ways to make building windows safe for birds. So try to make those windows safe because you want to minimize bird strikes on windows. And there's a great way to do that. There's different methods, and you can go to this website, abcbirds.org, and they have all kinds of solutions that you can take a look at. I'm not going to go into detail, but you definitely want to make your building safe for birds. And then you also want to reduce light pollution at night because, as I mentioned before, for every species of butterflies on the planet, there are 19 species of moths. And so light pollution harms those animals that your habitat attracts. Reduce the light pollution by using motion sensing warm color outdoor lights like a yellow light, or or use blackout fabric in your curtains to keep light from the inside from leaking outside, because lights attract insects at night, and those are easily eaten by other things that they normally wouldn't be eaten because they're exhausted. They keep flying at the light. Um, Light at night also interferes with bird migrations and so forth. Because people go, well, why are moths flying around at night? Because pollination happens 24/7. So pollination happens during the night, and that's what the moths do. We don't see them doing it because it's dark out, but that is their function. So some more of those best practices, you know, I'm all about doing less work. With 7 public native plant gardens to take care of, I literally do not want to spend all my time like, doing things because it's a lot of work. So minimizing work is the best thing that I concentrate on. And native gardens are less maintenance than a non-native garden with a lawn. Basically, I generally like leave things alone for long stretches of time, and then I go in and weed a little bit at a time. And that's mostly what we do in these gardens is weed. Um, but we first irrigate to establish the plants. Planting during the rainy season, which is now, will get those plants established very quickly. Trying to establish things in the summertime, you can do it, but it's a challenge because it's hot and dry and unpleasant. And so when you're planting things, irrigation should encourage the roots to search for water. So infrequent deep watering just outside of the root ball, prune sparingly, and to control dried up dead material for fire safety if that's an issue where you live. You don't have to fertilize, amend sparingly. I mean, literally don't don't do anything to the soil because the soil doesn't really need it. Um, People say, well, I have really heavy clay soil. In that case, you want to amend it to make it easier to work. But planting during the rainy season when the ground is moist and cool is going to make your life easier to establish these gardens. Um, Mulch to control weeds initially, and then to help establish the plants, and then later mulch with leaves and use a bit of wood bark on top to hold that in place and to give that uniform look that everybody loves. You can leave areas of bare dirt for those ground nesting bees because 70% of our native bees nest underground. And so you want to like not block their access to their nest. Um, don't use leaf blowers in planted areas. Leave the leaves. I mean, the leaves will break down. They're not going to smother your plants. I mean, you can push things off a little bit with your hands, but leaves will break down and drop through the plants, and plants will grow right up through those anyway. So you don't need to do leaf blowers because the leaf litter is where the larvae like to hang out. After they're done eating, they drop down into the leaf litter. And if you blow that away, you're basically inviting things into your yard, which are eating the leaves, and then they drop down and then you kill them. And that's not what we want to do. We want to just leave those leaves. So less work, just leave them. So, and don't use pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides. So literally do less work. Um, and I'm all about doing less work. So uh, leaves as mulch, and they provide a place for some insect species to overwinter. As the birds quickly discover, they are always out there digging around in the leaves. Insects eating tree leaves may drop down into that ground beneath and then burrow into that leaf litter until spring. And other insects eat dead leaves. So leaves are ecosystem gold. If you have leaves, you are lucky. It helps prevent weeds, absorbs water like a sponge, so it really sucks it in. It filters water, holds in soil moisture, insulates the soil, keeps the soil cool, and leaves encourage fungal decomposition, and they do quickly break down. Trees do better in soil with lots of fungal connections. And the video that I have here, let me turn that on, is me harvesting this here. You've probably seen this in your garden. This is Pizolithus tinctorium, a Bohemian truffle. These things, when they bloom in the fall and late fall, I collect them and I sprinkle their spores into planting holes because they help plants to establish. They the mycorrhiza will put their fibers around plant roots and exchange nutrients with the plants. And then they will connect up with other plants and set up a communication network between the organisms so that everybody knows what's going on in a garden. So if you have this dead man's foot fungus or Bohemian truffle or what people call them, ecosystem gold. They're kind of grody looking, but I tell you, these things are amazing. So don't be afraid of those. Those are actually good. It means you're doing something correct. And so leave the leaves. You're providing a foundation of life. And you can see here's an actual larva. I don't know what kind of larva this is. This is my leaf litter at home. And I just let the leaves fall where they may. And we have abundant birds in our yard. So native plant power creates dynamic beauty. Among the wonderful things provided when you plant native plants is that you're providing opportunities and the resources for organisms to complete their life cycles. You just want to take time for those biological processes to take place. And so this video here I'm showing you is the beautiful Ackman blue butterflies doing their mating dance. I always tell people plant native for more love. And you literally get to see these beautiful dances that these insects do. They just flutter around each other, the male and the female, like, I don't know, getting their vibe on. And this is their larval food source right here, which is the coastal buckwheat, Eriogonum latifolium. Super easy plant to grow. And when they're done doing the thing, the lady will lay her eggs on there and we'll get those every year. But the Ackman blue butterfly comes out in July, one of my favorite things to see. So these little butterfly mating dances, I mean, come on, it's a beautiful thing. So again, leave the leaves. Bumblebee queens overwinter in leaf piles. Especially attractive are those valley oak leaves. So a big pile of valley oak leaves are amazing. And so this is over at the Gwenda Street Garden. You can see there's a bumblebee queen. I know she's a queen because she's huge. And she's looking for a place to overwinter. So, you know, I'm telling you, these are the observations, these things work as intended. When we see and bees are a keystone species, so we want them to complete their life cycles. Um, Another best practice, pruning decisions. So this is a really cute little male Anthrophora, a digger bee. And the males don't have any place to really hang out. They basically will hang out looking for the females in their territories, and then they sleep in like flowers at night. Or sometimes they take a nap and they grab hold of stems like this and like go to sleep because then they can just like relax. Um, and so we don't really prune our gardens. Um, I like to tell people really take the time to observe to see how species are using the plants, because all of these plants, even though their use, their function to other organisms may not be apparent to you, they are being used. So you just have to observe and see how the resources are being used. So shelter. So a lot of plants have these hollow stems, and you get these stem nesters that lay their eggs in stacks at the very base of a stem. And so, um, you know, the latest research says even if you like leave a pile of stems in place, those aren't really as good as just leaving them in place on the plant, because a pile of stems on the ground are um, they fungus can get in there and other things, and so just leaving those stems upright is actually better. So we tend not to prune until after the stems are breaking down, and the stems are just super important if they have seeds on them, for both insects and for birds. And so leave the seed heads. Don't be in a big rush to prune anything. It's work. And, this is a little, I think this is a little titmouse here having some native sunflower seeds. And the birds will clean things up for you, and then the stems will start to break down. And once they look like they're decaying, at that point, then you can like tidy things up. And it could take months. But in the meantime, you can enjoy all the wildlife that your habitat garden provides. And um, So just saying another thing, I did not realize that hummingbirds start to nest in the wintertime. And so this is at Primrose. And I had gone out because we have a big patch of goldenrod here, and I was going to like cut it down. But then I saw a hummingbird collecting the fluff to make her nest with. And so I did not cut it down. In fact, I left it for months and months and months, and I think it might even still be there. And that was 3 years ago. So wait to see what nature is going to use your plants for. So yes, you can see you're picking the fluff there. Fluffy flower heads, they are great nesting material. Let's go to the next slide. So some final thoughts. It's a lot, I know. But as your understanding of how planting California natives helps the environment, so does your ability to optimize the power of your native plant garden, which will lead to an abundance of life, as well as enhancing your role in caring for nature's complex beauty. It's not hard. Plant the keystone species first, and everything kind of falls into place after that. And I will stop sharing and be happy to take any questions that people might have. Happy to answer any sort of questions, and hopefully encourage people to try this at home. Please do. It's not hard, and you won't ever be the same after.
Well, thank you for all of that wonderful information. We do have a couple of questions. Someone is asking, they would love to plant an oak tree, but what is the safe distance from a house to plant a tree of that size?
I would give it 20 feet. If you have that kind of space. Um, if you think about the tree eventually being 40 feet in diameter, um, 20 feet is kind of the minimum. That's how far I would definitely plant it at least 20 feet away.
And then Elaine says, thanks for all this great info. I'd like to have a variety of plants that flower at different times of the year so that there's always something blooming. But I also want plants that I won't have to water after they're established. Is it possible to design a native pollinator garden like that?
Absolutely. So you can actually see this in actuality on our corridor project. There's a section of it at the corner of Lewis Road on the west side, Lewis and Embarcadero. That does not get any irrigation at all. And uh, we have our backbone shrubs. Most of the plants there bloom, almost all year long. I have to be very judicious about what we plant there because, um, you know, it's a lot of work. I mean, the quarter project's going to be a quarter mile long, and so it's a lot of work. But these particular plants do have a lot of blossoms, um, during different times of year. Now, in the springtime, they have more. But certainly you can have the early bloomers in like your Arctostaphylos, which will bloom in January, all the way to your maybe your California fuchsias, which bloom um, into December, into November and December, and then ribes. You could plant some ribes in there, which will start blooming in December. So there are definitely things that will bloom all year round. They won't be the same plant, but you keep adding more and more plants, then you have like multiple things blooming simultaneously. Um, and that should be the goal over the years. And so as you just continue to add plants, you can go to those native plant nurseries at different times of year to see what's blooming at that time and to snag those plants and stick them into the garden once you have your backbone keystone species in, then just keep adding plants. And so people are like, how do I achieve a ton of color? It takes time. You know, start with those start with those backbone shrubs first so that they can form that framework to support all those other plants. And then you add in things like the bulbs and the other shrubs that basically will use the matrix of the plants that share resources to then to survive.
Excellent. We have someone asking, do you have any advice for renters?
Um, Boy, yes. So I know a few people who do rent and they just plant anyway. Um, what I like to do is like plant things in pots, certainly. There are a few nice shrubby perennials that will do great in pots. That way, when you move, you can take those with you. Um, and um, you know, and the great things about having things in pots is that if you want to plant then at your place, you can take seeds from those plants and scatter those. And it's really you still own your investment of the mother plant, but then you can just use the seeds and scatter those into your garden. And you know, these things just come up, right? It's like, I don't know how those poppies got in there.
It's
So
true.
yes,
They do find a way.
they find a way. Yes, they do.
We have another comment. I have an area which is a slope, so I'm interested to know native plants that help in erosion control.
Oh, there are lots of ground cover plants that are good for that. You have There are ground cover ceanothus that do great on a slope. You also have some of the sages that are ground cover like that do extremely well on slopes. I do believe that the Calscape website has other suggestions as well. And I mean, it depends. It's like south facing, west facing, east facing, north facing. Is it going to be hot and sunny, that sort of thing. And Calscape has a lot of great suggestions for those different circumstances as well.
Great. And Rick is asking, how do fruit trees integrate into a native garden, or do they?
They absolutely do. So in our home garden, we have an orange tree, which is blooming right now, and it's covered in bees. So they integrate well because the orange blossoms are wonderful. And so they're getting pollinated by the insects that are attracted to all the other things that we have. We also have a couple of apple trees. And so fruit trees will get a lot of pollination behavior on them with all these other things that are attracting organisms in. Um, and the other good thing about the native plants is that they will attract the predators that'll take care of some of those pests that you don't want on those apple trees or your cherry trees or whatever you have. So it's a nice symbiosis. You get extra pollination power when you combine the two.
I found that to be the case in my garden too. We have a lot of fruit trees and we have a ton of fruit and very few pest problems, so I can attest to that as well. Our next question, do native plants need to be grown in clusters, or can they do well if grown in different separate areas of an established landscape?
Um, I would say it sort of depends. Some plants like a ribes, for example, a big shrub, would look great by itself as a focal point. I think some of the smaller perennial plants do better in masses because there's more impact that they provide. So, but and so putting those some of the ones that bloom in mass and provide like asters or maybe some of the buckwheats together, it makes it easier also for the bees because then they don't have to spend a lot of time flying around. They can just like spend all their time in a small area collecting what they need because um, to make one baby bee, sometimes it takes all of the pollen from about 1,000 flowers to make one bee. So in that sense, it's good to cluster things together. Um, but if you have an overall abundance of things, then you can probably scatter things together. I think, though, for impact purposes, instead of having one here and one there and one there, having all those things together not only increases the impact, but they can also um, if they don't use a lot of water, then that's just an area that you don't have to water rather than if you have something next to something that's high water and low water, then you have to kind of like go around. Sometimes it's just easier to put things together, but there's really almost no wrong way to do it. Um, but certainly for feeding bees, you definitely want to have things more in masses.
Thank you. And Mikhail is asking, if I were to plant hummingbird sage in the garden, should I worry that it will try to take over?
Ah, hummingbird sage. It won't take over if it's a relatively dry area, but we have that at our Island Drive garden. And our Island Drive garden does get spray irrigation once a week for about 10 minutes just to kind of dust things off. But that's just enough to make that plant kind of a thug. And it is just like, it's like a plant war between that and the asters, which spread by runners. And at this point, I've decided that they can fight it out by themselves. So if it's a drier area, it probably won't take over. But in terms of like taking care of things, I'm trying to not plant things that spread by runners as much because of plants like to move around. The one thing that I do plant that does spread by runners is asters because they do provide pollen for pollen specialists, and it's super critical for those insects. And so I don't mind if those go where they want, but some of the other plants, like the hummingbird sage, can be a bit aggressive. So, it depends. Do you like your neighbors? Do they need some native plants in their yard? Because they will spread to where there's moisture. Any moisture, plant roots are really good at finding.
And we have another question. Any issues with native plants and backyard chickens cohabitating? And if I may, we have backyard chickens and they love our native plants and they provide wonderful shelter and we have no issues whatsoever. So what's your take on that, Juanita?
I they probably will eat a lot of the creatures and give lots of really yummy eggs. So circle of life, I would say go for it.
And Lynn asks, I have potatoes growing unexpectedly in my bed with a persimmon tree, some pepper plants, and flowers. These appear to be volunteer, not planted by me. Is this a good plant to keep in with the others, or shall I dig them up and move them elsewhere?
Tomatoes.
Potato.
Um, is it potatoes?
Yeah, potatoes. That's what she wrote.
Okay, well, you can certainly dig them up and eat them. Um, and but I don't see any problem with having them. If it's stuff that you want to eat, then you might as well keep it. But if it's something that you're not going to be um, consuming, then there might be some other things that would work better.
And Bev asks, do you, Juanita, do anything at Gamble Gardens in Palo Alto? And did you see the recent fascinating Amy Tan bird talk put on by Post, viewable online for free?
So I don't do anything at Gamble Garden. I do have friends there, and we know of each other. But I have my hands full with Seven Gardens, and a quarter-mile long corridor project. So um, and I unfortunately I did not see the presentation. I'll have to check that out.
And it looks like that wraps up our questions for tonight. But we had a fascinating discussion. I know I learned a lot. Oh, but I think we have one last. Oh, how did you end up managing 7 gardens? Someone is asking.
Uh, well, we started with the Primrose Way Garden, and it looked so good that the city came back and asked me if I wanted to design something for a cul-de-sac island, which was the Arcadia Place Garden. And I said, sure. And then I had my eye on the Island Drive site for a while, and um, asked the city if I get a grant to do this, can you guys remove the ivy that's there? And it's like 4,000 square feet, which is not small. And they're like, sure. And then they just started, the city came to me about the Gwynedd Street Garden and the Hopkins Garden and said, do you want to, can you design something? And I never say no to the city. Um, and so, um, yeah, I just don't say no, I guess is the answer.
And we also have a question, when is the Summer Winds Nursery Talk with shopping afterward?
Ah, yes, that is the 12th of this month. It's a Saturday. The talk, I think, is capped at 70 people. Um, and I think last time I checked, there were over 50 people signed up for that. And I'll talk from 11 to maybe 12. And then afterwards, we'll all head over to the native plant section and you know, bring more plants home because, we need more plants, clearly. And I was there a few days ago and I talked to the native plant lady there and I said, I'm talking here on the 12th and if you want to sell a lot of plants, and so she's gonna beef up the selection, so it should be good. I will probably come home with yet more plants that day myself, so I'm thinking that's gonna be a place to be on the 12th, definitely. Even if the talk is capped, I would come afterwards because it's a business. You can come and shop the natives. I will be there.
And the last question, or actually people keep chiming in. Um, we have, do you have any advice for someone starting a backyard nursery?
Protect your plants against squirrels. And um, what I do is I cover plants with like chicken wire covers, things that grow up through the chicken wire, or I use metal baskets and stuff like that to keep the squirrels out of my plants because I have a lot of rare things and things that take like from seed to bloom take 7 years. So that's one thing. Another thing I would do is I get the plants up off of the ground. If you have a chance to put them up on a table or some kind of like a metal, like a mesh structure, just to keep the slugs out. That's a lesson that I've learned. Um, slugs will get in there if you have things on the ground. You can get metal shelving units that are really sturdy, and get the plants up off the ground. I also use patio umbrellas in my own backyard nursery to shade things that I want to, kind of pamper along. Um, so that's what I do in my own backyard nursery. And then, check it every single day and just make sure everything is as it should be.
And our final comment for the evening is thank you for all the wonderful good you do, Juanita from Bev. Oh,
Uh,
and we have one last question. What do you
okay.
think of the wildflower mixes? Some of them seem to include things like calendula.
Yeah. Um, I prefer to choose specific species rather than a mix because I like to have control over what I design. Like I have to control everything, and so I want to like have my own specific mixes because maybe I want everything to be like pink or all white or all blue. And so I'm not going to let somebody else choose for me. I want to choose for myself. That's my preference.
I kind of agree with you there. You never know what you're going to get in a mix. You can get
Exactly.
very heavy with one thing and you end up with poppies that you never wanted taking over half your yard.
Yep.
But okay, well, it looks like that. Oh, every time I think that's the end. Oh, and another person is saying thank you very much for a wonderful talk. So I will second that and say
It's
thank
a
you
pleasure.
for
Yeah.
such a wonderful presentation and great photos. Oh my goodness, you have some wonderful pictures in your.
Hey, I discovered macro photography because um, you, there's really no better way to see what's going on than to get up with a camera real close. And it's a whole other world that opened up to me. So another thing, if people are interested in photography, you get to see all kinds of amazing creatures. And if you do macro, you get up in there and you can really see the structures and just the intricate forms that they take and the iridescent. It's just amazing.
It really is. And you've captured it all so beautifully. And thank you for sharing with us tonight. And thanks to our wonderful audience for all your great questions. And we hope to see you at some future classes. So hopefully everybody has a good night and take some of this wonderful California plant knowledge into this Earth Month and get some things going in your garden. And thank you again, Juanita.
It's a pleasure. Take care.
Good night, everyone.